Good morning and welcome to another segment of Capital Preview. I'm Bill Peard and I'll be your host this morning. Our guest today on Capital Preview is Senator Jerry Behn, Republican from Boone. Senator, good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Bill. Good to be here.
Hey, I'm going to just jump right into it. Probably one of the most controversial passages of a bill happened here just about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and that was the gas tax. So I'm going to let you kind of
wade into that a little bit.
Wade into that a little bit.
You know, that was an interesting mix, really. I had a lot of contacts both in favor of voting for the gas tax and those opposed to voting for the gas tax. And I really thought the intensity of those that were opposed to it were much more intense than the intensity of those that were for it. Those that were for it thought, well, if you really have to, if our infrastructure is indeed has issues and you really need to do something, okay, I guess you ought to. But those that were against it just said, you know, you guys have been taxing us enough. You got enough money. Just try to figure out how to spend the money you have more wisely. In the end, I did not vote for it. And one of the reasons I didn't vote for it is because there were no systemic changes that would help save taxpayer money. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about just briefly, and what I want to encourage everybody that's watching this program this morning, is don't just think that because we passed the gas tax, now that crisis is over and we can just forget about it and go on to the next subject. Reality is, we also, even though that gas tax, it's anticipated it'll raise $200 million, okay? To put that in perspective, we get $300 million from the federal government. And that $300 million that comes from the federal government, in my estimation, is spent on some things that are really unnecessary, and part of the reason they're spent on unnecessary items is because of strings attached at the federal level. There are requirements that come with the federal money. And frankly, it's not federal money to begin with. It's a federal tax that's levied. We send the money to Washington, they turn around and send it back to us. And so we're getting our own money back. And it's my strong feeling that we know better how to spend that money than some formula at the feds that really is arbitrary. I mean, it's just whatever they thought at that particular point in time was a good idea. And so with the change at the federal level now, anticipation is that federal highway funding formula will come to the Senate floor and it will get debated on. With that in mind, what I'm encouraging people to do is contact now, and what I did last summer is I contacted Grassley and Harkin. Well, now Senator Harkin is no longer there, so I would encourage everybody to contact Senator Grassley and now Senator Ernst, and then also our 4 representatives, Congressman Blum up in the northeast corner and Congressman Loebsack down in the southeast corner, and then new Senator or Congressman Young down in the southwest corner, and then Congressman King, and encourage them to do one of 2 things. Either my highest priority would be to simply block grant those funds back to Iowa, and then we can do with them whatever we think is important. But I'm not real hopeful that the feds will go that far. But at the very minimum, perhaps they would allow us to apply and receive a waiver so that on a particular project, we wouldn't have to do it. And I have anecdotal evidence that just abounds on bridges, some of those other things that were $8, $9, $10 million projects. As soon as the federal money got involved, pretty soon it'd mushroom up to $13 million because they'd have extra engineering or they have whatever requirements that go along with it. So I maintain that $300 million that we get from the feds would be even more efficient and would have a bigger impact on our infrastructure in Iowa if we would actually get to use it the way we need to use it. So I really think it's important that everybody contact their federal delegation and let them know exactly that they believe that Iowa can do a better job of deciding how to spend that money. So, and the reason I bring that up is because it was pretty controversial, and there were passions high on both sides of this thing, and a lot of people now are going to say, well, okay, it's passed, it's over, it's done, let's just move on. And my fear is if we don't do a better job of spending those dollars, our infrastructure still won't get fixed. The gas tax has already been increased. We'll have more revenue in there, but we won't see the results that we thought we were going to see. And so I don't want the passion that was there to just dissipate and go on. I think it's important that we can really make a difference, and I really think we can. And I did receive a letter back from then Senator Harkin, which pleased me immensely, and he thought the idea sounded sound when I contacted him last summer. So it's one of those deals where I don't want our federal delegates to forget about the fact that we contacted them they're going to be bringing it up. Let's keep it on the front and center, and let's see what we can do with it. So I think that's really important.
No, I think that's great advice, considering the feathers that were ruffled in passing that gas tax.
Exactly.
And so
it really did make a lot of people angry. And again, the intensity that I had from the individuals that were opposed to it was really, I mean, there was a lot of passion. And so I think while the iron is hot, so to speak, let's turn our passion towards the feds, and let's make a difference on something that could last for a long time.
Absolutely. Well, the next subject I want to talk to you about a little bit, I know is, I wouldn't say near and dear to people, but it's a constitutional thing that you have got to do as an elected official, and that is pass a budget at the Iowa State House. So you want to kind of go through the budget?
Yeah, the budget itself is what I think is really going to take most of the time from here on out, the rest of the legislative session. There will be some bills that pass through the funnel. You know, we've got the two different funnels, and the first funnel is already passed, and now the second funnel, which will be where the bills from each house got to flip back and forth, and I call it the bouncing bills stuff. And so, Bill, I thought you'd like that. But anyway, once the bills get back and forth between the houses and they pass their respective funnels, they're either still alive for the session, or they're, as we refer to them, as they're dead for this session. That doesn't mean they're permanently dead. They can either, sometimes they can be added on to a bill through an amendment process if it is germane to the subject matter of the bill, and that's up to the President of the Senate to determine the germaneness of an amendment. And if it is indeed germane, sometimes we can add things to it. But the long and short of it is, with the basic budget, is the Revenue Estimating Conference met in December, and I think they anticipated we would have approximately $200 million in additional revenue. Now the Revenue Estimating Conference met in March and said, now it looks like it's more like going to be 180 million. So my recollection of the numbers is that it dropped roughly $20 million, which in the grand scheme of things, in a $7 billion budget, it will make some difference, but I don't think it's going to be enough that the governor will have to resubmit a budget or anything else. I think the numbers can be massaged and we can get that worked through. The problem is, what we refer to as built-ins are relatively high this year with the property tax relief bill that we passed, and then the Medicaid, and then the school funding formula. All those things compound, and when you put them all together, I think there's roughly $400 million worth of things that we're supposed to fund, and we've got about $200 million to do it. So the choice is going to be, do you take some money out of our ending balance, which is problematic in that you're actually spending more money than you're taking in. That's not sustainable. I know the House is not really open to that kind of a concept, and so it's going to be an interesting debate. We're in a minority in the Senate, so even though I adhere to those principles, I may not get a vote on a budget that actually is balanced. It's going to not spend more than we take in. So that's going to be a big deal, Bill, and I think that will really take up most of the time the rest of the session.
And I know another thing, kind of going to a different topic, the educational savings account, the ESAs.
Yeah, the ESAs. I've been a staunch proponent of the educational savings account. It's a concept that says that the money follows the child. And the idea behind that is to implement several things. First off, I was taught in school that a monopoly drives up the cost and drives down the service quality. And in looking around at some of the federal rulings, anything over about 80% is the idea is that that's a monopoly. And if you look at the public school system in Iowa, they have about 90% of the school students. You say, well, that's obvious. They're the public schools.
Right.
But yet, I think the same concept that occurs in private industry occurs there too. I think when there's no competition or very little competition, I think that again drives up the cost and drives down the quality. The other thing it does is if we would have an educational savings account and the money would follow the child, it now engages the parent. What we were aware of years and years ago in the legislature is that the single biggest factor in determining how well a child does in school is the involvement of the parents. Well, how do you legislate involvement of the parents? We've struggled with that forever. Well, now comes an idea that says, well, let the money follow the child. Now, if the parent decides that that particular institution is doing what they want, they can just keep them there. If they decide it's not, if they are engaged with the school and they're not responding to what the parent wants, now they have the option to change. And that introduces an entirely new dynamic, and I think you would see a huge increase in parental involvement, which in the end, what are we after? We're after student achievement.
Right.
And I think that would improve student achievement. And so I just think, I really don't see any downside to this. The biggest issue is right now is funding. And that's one of those things that would just have to be worked through. But that's one of those bills that did not make the funnel. And so I don't anticipate we'll have much more action. Last couple of years ago, we did get it attached as an amendment to the educational reform bill. And that actually hit a tie in the Senate. It was 25-25. So there's a lot of support for the concept. There's just one senator short. But so I'm really enthused about that concept, and I really think that's an idea that would be hugely beneficial. So we'll just have to see what we can work out.
Kind of Chapter 20 reform, kind of the same thing, didn't get out of the...
Yeah, it didn't get out of the House. Well, it got out of the House. Now it's over to the Senate. So we'll see whether it'll pass, whether it'll even be brought up. My anticipation is that's kind of the holy grail of collective bargaining is Chapter 20. And anytime you even so much as talk about it, you raise the ire of everybody involved. But the concept that the House wanted to get across was an arbitrator has to pick one side or the other. So if the school offers 1% or 2% or 3% and the union wants 6% or 7%, whatever it is, or if there's 1% versus 4 or 2 versus 3, whatever it is, the arbitrator has to pick one side or the other. They can't pick somewhere in between. And all the House bill said was the arbitrator can now pick somewhere in between. So they can kind of they can actually be an arbitrator instead of just pick a winner and pick a loser, so to speak. So I think the concept of that bill is outstanding, and I would love to see it debated in the Senate. And time will tell whether we'll actually even get a chance to debate it.
Sure.
But I'm sure enthusiastic about it. I think it would be a good idea.
Senator, talk to us about the limited death penalty for kidnap, rape, and murder.
Yeah, in Iowa we have kind of it's a strange deal. We have kind of a perverted incentive to murder your victim, because if you kidnap somebody, you get life in prison. If you rape somebody, you get life in prison. If you murder somebody, you get life in prison. This bill would say if you kidnap, rape, and then murder your victim of a minor, you would get the death penalty. And I think that adds a disincentive to murder your victim. And with this kind of a high-profile case we just had the other day up here at Webster City with that guy that took that little girl back out in the woods. And hearing the testimony, even the sheriff was moved at how awful that crime was. And I really think there should be an avenue to see that justice is served.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Senator, for being with us today.
Time has rolled up all
our time is, yeah. Well, I think we had some good discussion, and obviously you're passionate about some of these issues, so we appreciate your time and service.
My pleasure.
So thank you, Senator Behn. We'll be back to talk more about issues facing Iowa and the Iowa legislature. You're watching Capitol Preview on MC22.